There is a moment when the noise recedes, and what remains is a lucid shame, not for the wrong you did, but for the right you refuse to pursue. And if you stay with me, you'll see why Carl Jung believed your undisciplined self isn't lazy. It's exiled, banished to the margins of your psyche and begging to come home. We seldom admit what it does to a person to watch themselves break the same promise day after day, to whisper tomorrow with a mouth that no longer believes its own sound, to pass the mirror and feel a quiet resentment, stern-on hatred, but disbelief, because trust, once fractured with yourself, turns every reflection into a witness. You say you'll change, you feel the first sparks for a few hours, then dawn arrives like a verdict, and the man who vowed has vanished, replaced by the same tired face, scrolling again, running again, hiding again. Jung warned that people will do almost anything to avoid facing the soul. And what if avoiding discipline is precisely that, less procrastination than a spiritual refusal to honor your future self? What if the tired, unfocused, scattered persona you wear isn't who you are, only who you've rehearsed? If this is stirring something, don't just consume, subscribe, because this space exists for the parts of you the world doesn't name. You've been trained to think discipline is effort. But discipline isn't effort. It's identity, and you won't become disciplined while you keep identifying as someone trying to become it. Let that land, and the morning war begins to make sense. Most people never become who they are not for lack of striving, but because they remain strangers to their own potential, and so they chase change as if it were external, another job, city, system, app, speaker, hype, while the truth is you don't need more, you need less escape, less noise, less hiding from the one responsibility you feared most, not to your boss, your parents, your followers, but to your becoming. The sacred contract between who you are and who you are called to be. Discipline lives there, not in 5 a.m. alarms or color-coded checklists, but in devotion, a clear yes to your highest order. Think back to when you felt most alive. It wasn't cheap pleasure or idle rest. It was alignment, the quiet surge when you kept your word and outlived an old limit. That wasn't ego, it was integrity. The psyche longs for unity, and the more you fracture saying one thing, doing another, the more your subconscious rebels. Resistance isn't laziness, it's your mind rejecting the fraud of performance. Lack of discipline is not the disease, but the symptom of a split soul, one half drafting goals, the other shredding them, and with each repetition the fault line deepens. What you resist persists, Jung said, and the parts you exile don't die. They sink and become shadow, not only the wounded and chaotic, but the noble and orderly, the disciplined, ambitious, lucid, structured force inside you that you locked away out of fear of failing or fear of your own magnitude. Because if you truly commit, if you become disciplined, you surrender your alibis. You must be proof, and that frightens you, so you stall. Yet every time you betray your schedule, abandon your priority, hit snooze, scroll past a vow and choose cheap dopamine over earned regard, a piece of you erodes. Tiredness isn't from work, it's from debt, guilt, interest accruing on promises unpaid. Hear this in your bones. Discipline is not an add-on, it's the soul's immune system, the quiet power that safeguards you from regret and spiritual rot. Drop a comment when something pierces you, might be the echo someone else needs. Remember, there was a time you wanted this, before distraction, before burnout, before you misplaced your own faith, but your spirit did not forget. We will relight that flame, but first we descend to the root, where the fracture began. Why structure feels like suffocation. How Jung's archetypes revealed the hidden identity sabotaging your ascension. You didn't become undisciplined by accident. You were trained by 1,000 small betrayals, some from the world, many from yourself, until you absorbed a story that you're the one who almost does it, who nearly changes, whose potential perpetually defers. That story is not you. It's a survival mask forged from fear, rejection, abandonment, and the subtle wounds no one saw. And now that mask impersonates your identity. Jung wrote that the unconscious, left unmade conscious, will direct your life, and you will call it fate. So let's make it conscious. Remember the first time discipline was punished in you. You spoke and were shushed. You were excited and got mocked. You built something small and proud, and someone trampled it. The fracture began not in laziness but pain. The disciplined self is deeply vulnerable because it requires belief, and when belief is shattered early, the noble aspect retreats. Call it the king, the warrior, the architect, the magician, the inner sovereign that orders chaos, the tactician of time and energy, the bridge between vision and deed. He did not die, he was unclaimed. So every time you begin a habit, a routine, a focused sprint, you aren't starting at zero. You are walking past the graves of old mockers and your own ghosts whispering, "You won't finish." Unless you recognize this, you will sabotage that, because you want to fail, but because a part of you still believes you must. Here's Jung's hard medicine. Outer failure is often an identity conflict, not an effort deficit. You can't outwork a self-image that contradicts your aim. You will revert to the man you believe you are. So how do we change belief through integration, not hype? Imagine two men inside you. One longs for legacy, order, sovereignty, home, focused, faithful to his word. The other wants ease and invisibility. He avoids risk and intensity, choosing warmth over victory. They are not enemies but split guardians of the same life. Stop chopping the lazy one to pieces. Ask him, "What are you protecting me from?" And he will answer, "The shock of disappointment, the memory of laughter at your expense, the cold ache of misunderstanding." Once you honor that, discipline ceases to be a civil war and becomes a homecoming or return to the throne. You abdicated the centered seat where the inner king stabilizes not to dominate but to bring everything into right proportion. When a man meets his inner king, he stops performing for permission. He organizes his days to mirror the hierarchy within. And that is what discipline is. Psychological architecture, external symmetry of inner order. Without it, you don't just lose hours, you lose yourself. Which is why undisciplined men feel shame even when no one is watching. Reintegrate the builder, the warrior, the father, the guide and add, the lover who brings devotion and the magician who brings insight, or you'll keep hunting motivation that never arrives. You weren't meant to live on hype, you were meant to remember. If you're still here, you can feel the ancient part waking the wise, structured, steady, relentless, one who doesn't shout, he builds. Forgive yourself for the years you wandered. This is not penance, it is maturity. The immature man says, "I'm broken, fix me," while the mature man says, "I am whole, remember me." There was never anything wrong with you, you forgot so each time you choose structure over chaos, presence over distraction, action over hesitation. You are not inventing a stranger. You are returning to the man your younger self prayed for and your older self will bless. Jung called the great work individuation, not success, but wholeness. The knitting of fragments into one living truth, and discipline is the path. The proof to your unconscious that you are safe and sovereign, that the king is home. So consider this declaration. What would your life look like if you stopped living as reaction and started living as intention? Time and death are already counting. Time doesn't merely pass, it accumulates. Each minute of delay becomes a brick in the architecture of regret. You don't need to be convinced of who you are proving it in small acts, day by day. Many drift and wake a decade later, sculpted by hesitation and fear, disguised as wisdom. You weren't born lazy. You were taught to mistrust your power, so you dulled your edge so it wouldn't threaten anyone, not even you. Real discipline is quiet gravity. It changes the room, and that weight unsettled the sleepers, so you hid to stay loved by the dreamers. What if loneliness was never punishment but passage? Every time you betray your potential to remain comfortable, you rehearse death not of the body, but of the will, the slow fading of fire. Jung did not promise meaning through pleasure. He pointed to confrontation. Face the dragon of chaos, failure, and pain, and walk forward with open eyes. Discipline is the blade you carry. Everyone is disciplined to something, some to distraction, some to addiction, some to the inherited voices. They never cross-examined, but few are disciplined to their becoming. Become one of the few. Treat discipline not as grind, but as a way of relating to time itself. When you choose what soothes now over what builds later, you tell time, "I do not respect you," and time responds by slipping away. You feel late, heavy, stuck. Realign and honor time, and the change begins inside. Rhythm returns, purpose steadies, your life shifts from reaction to ritual. At its highest, discipline is sacrament. You wake to meet your oath, you train to remember yourself, you eat and rest to consecrate the body that carries your vow. Your calendar becomes a liturgy and your tasks become prayers, until the man you once imagined stands in your mirror with quiet eyes. None of this happens in a week. It arrives through grief, because to become who you are, one version must die. One who breaks his word and hides behind someday. Bury him with honor. He did his best. He kept you safe. He got you here, and hold a small funeral in your heart, then a coronation. When you grieve him, the energy you once spent pretending returns to you, and you build mornings of clarity, routines that root even when you don't feel like it, a schedule that doesn't cage you but liberates you, because order is armor and margin is mercy. The noisier the world grows, the more precious a calm, structured man becomes. Be him. Start now, not Monday, not after one more stumble now, because this breath is your initiation. You don't need another reason, and you don't need to feel ready. You are already worthy of disciplined, you simply needed the reminder. And wholeness, Jung said, is not achieved by piling on more, but by embracing all that you are, even the parts that look lazy, scared, chaotic. You are not here to exile them, but to lead them. When your inner house is ordered, power stops being loud and becomes peace. True discipline doesn't clamor for applause. It walks quietly, daily, like a man who remembers what he came here to do. So return to your vow now, not tomorrow, and you will stop avoiding discipline, not because you must, but because you finally know what it means to keep your word to yourself. If this resonates, subscribe and leave a comment. You could be the signal that wakes the version of someone else still searching in the dark.